Please proceed.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this conversation around decentralized finance and blockchain. I'm very delighted and honored to be here as representing GIFT in our partnership with Baidu Musharra for this session. We have some very well-known experts in the topics of blockchain, fintech, and Islamic finance, and we will be taking you through this conversation over the next 45 minutes to 1 hour. We will also be opening up for Q&A towards the end of the session for about 10 to 15 minutes. So if you do have questions during the session as well, feel free to type them in through the interface at the bottom, and we can always include them during the conversation. What we will do is I will quickly start with a short presentation introduction going into blockchain and fintech to lay the premise for this conversation, and then we will come and get introduced to our speakers and take that forward. Right? So, second. Right, so my name is Musheer. I am the founder and managing director of FinStep Asia. It's a digital advisory focused on fintech based in Hong Kong. I'm also a board member and co-lead of the Islamic Fintech chapter for Global Impact Fintech Forum, which is a co-organizer of this session. When we look at fintech, one of the things, and decentralization, one of the things for us to focus a lot on is to look at the evolution of decentralization and money, right? If we think about how things started all these years back, we started with a basic function for exchange of value as barter, right? So if I was a farmer, I probably had sheep, or I was a shepherd, and I would go exchange that with a fisherman for fish at a certain value, maybe 20 fish for one sheep, right? And that was a system that people worked out depending on the availability and how unique it was, and depending on what occasion it was. So if it was someone's wedding and you wanted to make biryani, the sheep would be more expensive as compared to a normal rate, and that changed. We moved from there in terms of attaching a value from a barter for a very relative 1:1 value to a mental accounting and subjective ledgers, in the sense of people starting to use their accounting based on mental ledgers, right? Saying, okay, I have done this person owes me 5 sheep, that person owes me 20 fish, I owe somebody 40 potatoes, or whatever there was. And there was all subjective ledgers in the mind, and people would vary that based on the value that you had. This evolved to people starting to use shells as objective ledgers, and then you then had a proper representation. And this is an important step in the evolution of money as such, is you now had a value attached to a representative object, right? So the shell was nothing but representing certain number of sheep or certain number of fish, etc. And then people started looking at shells as a representation of another object, right? And what that led to was people had a value that, okay, 5 sheep is equal to 1 shell, 20 fish is equal to 1 shell. So you could then exchange these shells in a sense, but that was limited to certain communities and not necessarily that everybody followed that on a universal basis during trade. When gold was discovered and people started mining gold, and gold coins were created in the sense of creating a shape and a value, this became more universal. Not only you had an object representing a certain value, but you also had an object that was accepted universally. Gold was loved from all the way from East in Japan, all to the West in Northern America, Southern America, to Africa, to Asia and Europe. So everybody had the same kind of value that they looked at gold, and you could then start trading and exchanging goods over time. Now, this remained a universal ledger and a value of exchange for many centuries before the printing of the first paper currency in China. We then went from an object representing a certain value as universally accepted to another object that was representing this value, right? So you started using paper to represent the gold for an exchange form for a value of everything else. Why did the paper come into existence? Because carrying gold safely and across multiple geographies while traveling was difficult for people, and it was not necessarily safe. So carrying these bundles of paper as a in a compact form was much safer, and was easily representative. And that's where the concept of I promise to pay the bearer of a note, right? That's what fiat money was, and this existed for a few centuries, a couple of centuries, and you had the gold standard attached to each the value of the coin, and then you moved on from there to a representation through corporate tokens. Now, while this was happening in terms of digitization of money, one of the things that took place was the Bretton Woods Agreement, based off which you no longer in the 1970s had the gold standard, meaning when you issued a dollar in paper, it was equivalent to a dollar of gold, right, in weight of gold. A dollar represents a weight in gold in real terms. And once that was detached, you could now effectively print as much money as you want on the basis that you had a certain amount of gold. That's what the gold standard was. I will only print as many dollars as the gold I have with me, right? Or lira, or rupee, or dinar, whatever it was. But once that standard went away, you then relied on the value of that particular currency. This led to more changes, more inflation, and more value destruction over time because there could be manipulation of currencies. There is an instance that rocked the world in 2008, right? Tuesday, September 16, 2008. But 15th of September is when Lehman Brothers collapsed. And this became a seminal moment in the financial services world because banks had started investing in securities which they felt which were backed by securities of mortgages. And when those securities started failing based on failure of mortgages being paid up, you had a massive crash. Why is that an important element in terms of peer-to-peer, or in terms of the evolution of money? It is an important moment because up until then, for the last 2 centuries in particular, banks were looked at as these steady, strong, responsible intermediaries. And when the banks collapsed, a lot of people were massively impacted, not just because of the economic downturn, but also because the banks went bankrupt, the likes of Lehman. So even if you had some cover, you lost a lot of your money. And hence the trust of relying on a bank to give you sound advice, take care of your money, started eroding. That's where the Bitcoin was born, as an element to provide a system where two parties, individuals in particular, can connect with each other and transact between each other for a value of a digital token that they both can determine, right? It was not connected to a dollar. It did not need a bank. It did not need a third party beyond having somebody to validate a transaction. That's where the trustless ecosystem came in. Blockchain as a technology is nothing, it's not necessarily very new, as in terms of when Satoshi created the Bitcoin white paper, it has been around since the 90s, but it was the first time it was used in the Bitcoin world. In addition to the Bitcoin being created in early 2009, you also had the technology evolution where, with the launch of the Apple iPhone in September of 2007, a year before the collapse of Lehman, you now had in your hand a machine, call it a device, whatever you would, that could have the same computing power as of what NASA used to launch Apollo into the moon. You could now do a lot more transactions on the go. This, coupled with 3G technology, meant that a lot of transactions could be real time, and you need not have to wait 2 days, 3 days to do any transactions. And you could do these mobile wherever you were. It did not need you to go physically for any transactions. Banks were caught short in terms of trying to rebuild their businesses and survive. And while technology is evolving, there was a gap that was created, which led to the modern day creation of fintech, where these startups were innovators, started using modern technology to fulfill various needs of the institution. So if you're looking at evolution of fintech, the telegram, which was in the late 1800s, was brought in to connect financial services in terms of stock trading and the news thereof in London and New York. You had the mainframes in the 60s, followed prior to that through the ATMs of Barclays, which a lot of people attribute as the first fintech example, and then online banking and trading. So today we've spoken about what fintech has been and how that's evolved. We'll talk more about how blockchain has been impacting this ecosystem, what is being happening in decentralization, not just through blockchain, but also otherwise in the fintech ecosystem, because we now have moved from all the way initially everything was relative value when you looked at the barter system, and when you look at cryptocurrencies to a certain extent as well, it is relative value that you and I have for a certain currency outside of the existing ecosystem. So let's now come to our panel. I'll stop sharing. Thank you for the panelists for their patience while I was doing the presentation. How about we go through introduction of each of you, and then we'll follow through from our questions from there. Why don't we start with Mastura? You're on mute.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Mastura.
Okay. Assalamualaikum, everybody. I'm Mastura. I'm working at Mike Malaysia under the CEO office. I'm one of the researchers there, and I'm handling blockchain ecosystem at Mine. Okay, I think you just wanted us to introduce ourselves first, right?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, that's it, I think.
Would you like to just mention a little bit more about MITE and the work you do there, please?
MITE is actually a think tank for government of Malaysia looking at emerging technologies and how we can actually use this to help businesses in Malaysia. So we are actually a partnership organization that helps bridge collaborative work between the private and public space in Malaysia, as well as between Malaysian entities with international organizations. So basically that's what we do. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Daniel?
Hi, my name is Daniel Liebau. I'm the founder of Liebau Capital. I'm based in Singapore and Hong Kong sometimes if travel and COVID allows. My firm is basically an advisory firm that helps both actually fintech startups and large financial services institutions wrap their heads around how to use blockchain and what to think about when they want to use this new platform technology. I'm also a researcher, so I write and investigate blockchain technology and its use in finance, and teach a class in a local university on blockchain and digital assets in Singapore. Great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Umar?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Umar Munshi. I'm the co-founder for the Ethis Group. And I'll give a quick overview of Ethis. So Alhamdulillah, over the past few years, we have grown quite a little bit. We started back in 2014 as a somewhat a crowdfunding platform and evolved quite a lot over time. So right now, today, we have licensed investment platforms in Malaysia dealing in equity crowdfunding, in Indonesia for P2P financing or lending. Both are Sharia compliant. In Malaysia, we are the first Sharia compliant equity crowdfunding platform. And in Indonesia, of course, we are Sharia compliant as well. And we are expanding to the Middle East. We have some initial approvals, not yet full license to go live, but initial approvals in Qatar and in Dubai. So that's a little bit on the background for the company. We also have Global Sedekah, which is the social finance marketplace. So essentially, we run platforms to match funds to investment and donation charity projects with social impact. And in terms of blockchain, for the group, we have not really adopted blockchain yet, although there are some projects and some plans in the background that's moving. I have been involved in a number of projects with a few of my friends and networks on a loose capacity, including a few ICOs in the past and some other tokens. So I'm probably the least knowledgeable among the experts here, but I'll try to share whatever I can. Thank you.
I'm sure you'll add a lot of value in the conversation, especially looking at decentralization without blockchain, right? So we have such brilliant panelists with us. I'm going to take a dive in to the conversation straight away. When we look at fintech decentralization, as I mentioned, right, we came from the barter system all the way to now, again, reinventing the barter system as it were through digital tokens. How are you seeing decentralization as you see being applied in your respective fields? Mastura, maybe we'll start with you to talk about how decentralization is being used for community access, for new markets, and for inclusivity.
Sorry, was it for me?
That's for Mastura.
Oh,
She's
Mastura.
on mute.
You need to unmute. Yeah, there you go.
She goes. Thank you.
Okay, I think fintech itself is a huge area, very expensive, and it's growing by the day, if not, by the hours. But I'd like to have to look at it, to approach it from the perspective of Islamic finance, not banking, but Islamic finance, and to compare it to the blockchain or the decentralized ecosystem, because I think there's some similarities. And I think there are opportunities from the decentralized ecosystem that can help Islamic finance make a major headway in providing services for the global markets, right? So I think if you look at Islamic finance itself, it started as a peripheral community and only got into the mainstream through as a platform for interest-free financing in the 1950s, before we actually started building Islamic banks all over, starting from Middle East to Asia, including Malaysia as well. So I think, there's now, if you compare this to the blockchain ecosystem, we are listening, or we are now watching a lot of these communities that were in peripherals that had small or very niche interests that are coming into the mainstream. And we're looking at them, one of it is the Bitcoin community. It's now in trillions. And there's a lot of tokens. These people are actually, centered around tokens that share their interests in there. So I think this is quite similar, and there's a lot of opportunities for us to look at it and to help Islamic finance to actually go in a different way than what it is. So when we first started, of course, the body of knowledge, I think, was not really that big for Islamic finance. So we actually benchmarked the traditional banking. And what we did was we actually put added value add into the whatever the services that was provided in the traditional banking. So you have sukuk, but sukuk bond, it's still, something like this. It's the same thing. So this is where I think we can actually benefit most when we look into this decentralization, because then you're looking at Islamic finance as a business platform. But if you start looking at Islamic finance as a deen, way of life, the way it should be, because or else you can just call yourself interest-free finance. But if you talk about yourself Islamic finance, there must be Islamic elements in there. But it doesn't mean that you have to actually control or limit yourself to talk about riba. There's so many things in Islamic finance that's, how do you do micro credits, for example, and there's Arahnu system. I'm just giving a few examples that I think how these different and smaller interests, or even like Malaysia has done this thing about tabung haji, which is for pilgrims from Malaysia has handled from Malaysia, from China, and a few things. But this, I think we need to actually, from the Islamic finance point of view, to go beyond what we are thinking right now, and to take the discussion beyond that, and to actually look around and see where we can help, even like carbon footprint trades and all these things. These are very Islamic value, very you know, and healthcare and all these things. So it's just like what we call this halal thing. There's halal, there's halalan toiban. So you know, there's a few other things that actually present opportunities with us once we change our mindset about looking at decentralization as well as Islamic finance. That's where I'm coming in now. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that was very, very helpful, right? Umar, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to go to Dan after that. But from a decentralization perspective, one of the things that we can talk a little bit more about is looking at peer-to-peer and crowdfunding, right? Which is also trying to change that central ecosystem or intermediary ecosystem and going D2D in some senses. Would you have any comments to share on that?
Yes. Maybe I can give few examples, real cases of our
Sure,
experience.
please, yeah.
I mean, as I mentioned, we have not yet implemented the blockchain on our systems. We're not on a blockchain-based platform, but the decentralized approach is essentially, you know, to a large extent, very aligned with, or more or less, the fundamentals of crowdfunding, right? Where you decentralize decision making when it comes to funding decisions or fund movement. Typically, funds come from large institutions or from individuals with large cash. Now it comes from a crowd. So that basically is decentralization. Now, how it has manifested in our business, what we did for initial years, and right now we have focused on other sectors as well. But in our initial years, we focused a lot on social housing development projects in Indonesia, and we targeted foreign investors. So initially it was tough, but we saw that as more and more people started getting attracted to this, money started flowing. However, if you were to just compare to decentralized sources of funds, social housing in a country like Indonesia is typically not on the radar, right? Big banks, especially foreign banks, foreign fund managers and investment houses would not typically invest in this kind of deals. But when it became decentralized, or when the approach was decentralized, people felt that they wanted to invest, and people were keen to invest because of the social motive. So this is this social motive component, I think, or community component, especially when you talk about decentralized systems on blockchain, it's about community. It's about humans. It's about people collectively behaving a certain way, and that way is not dictated by any one or majority party, right? So another example we can share is recently we had a fundraising, a charity campaign in Ramadan to raise funds for Rohingya translation of the Quran into Rohingya language on video, which has never been done before because there's no real proper written Rohingya language. Now, typically, big funders will again not want to do that. But when it went online and with almost very little marketing, it just started to spread, right? So this whole decentralized concept, I think the internet itself initially started that way. Although today we see all the giants of the internet world dictating a lot of things, and that's where you can sort of game the system when you become big enough, right? So that I think I believe the true essence of decentralization is to allow for humanity to make decisions collectively. I think that's the key difference, or the key characteristic that makes it unique and very powerful as well. Implemented in Islamic finance, I feel that this is something that we can leverage on or utilize over time more and more to fulfill objectives that are for society. So collective objectives that today probably is decided by people in power in financial institutions, stakeholders, and so on. There can be mechanisms to input, automated ways of fulfilling certain objectives or certain behaviors, not human behavior, but the behavior of the system, right? Whether it's finance focused or something else. Yep. So I hope that gives a little bit of perspective from my side.
It does. Thank you so much. Dan, now coming to you, right? Maybe we can start off with a conversation around what is blockchain in terms of DLT, etc. for you, and how is that helping in decentralization? And following that, we can maybe talk a little bit more about the DeFi economy and how blockchain is being used in finance overall.
Sure. Let me try and build on top of what Mastura and Umar also mentioned, right? So I think when we think about decentralization in the blockchain world, I think it's very important to not look at it in a very binary fashion where you say it's either centralized or it's decentralized, right? I think I would encourage everyone to think about it as a spectrum, because to go from very centralized sort of organization of mankind to a little bit more decentralized is not something that you can just make happen overnight, right? It even in a decade you can't do that, and we see that, you know, Bitcoin is more than a decade old, and yet we haven't really achieved that much decentralization. So I think this is something that takes a long time. But there are small steps that we can already observe, right? So for example, blockchain enables us to create securities, traditional securities that eventually can be owned in smaller fractions, right? And while that is not allowed in every jurisdiction because of current regulation, at least the technical fundamentals are there to enable a bit more fairer, perhaps, wealth in the future. But there are also bigger steps, right? So bigger steps, when people in blockchain think about decentralization, they think about no central authorities, right? So if we want money, we don't want it to be managed by a central bank. If we want to transact, then we want to transact without intermediaries, right? No banks, asset managers, brokers, custodians, all of these guys out of the picture. I think that is it's going to take a long while, right, until that happens. And I guess another aspect of blockchain that is very interesting to think about in the context of decentralization is this idea of a public blockchain or open system, right? Anyone can join. So I think one of the key characteristics is also that it's not a closed system where you need to ask for permission, but where it's very easy for every human to join. Now, where do we have friction? We have friction when the traditional system kind of interacts with the new system, right? And that's where, I mean, one of the recent papers that we wrote, we also talk about how it's important for these blockchain asset issuers to be quite transparent and to disclose certain information about themselves, because otherwise the public doesn't even have any chance to assess what they're getting themselves into, right? As you can tell, I could probably go on forever with this topic because I'm quite passionate about it, but I leave it here to start with, I think.
Thank you so much, Dan, on that. And I agree, this is a topic we could talk all day on, right? Coming back to Mastura and Umar, right? Maybe as we've spoken a little bit about Islamic finance, we've spoken a little bit about crowdfunding, etc. How have we seen Islamic fintech evolve, right? Are we now at a stage where there is maturity happening? We've seen the number of Islamic fintechs double almost in the last 3 years, based on the Global Islamic Fintech report that came out last month. So it'd be very good to understand from both of you how you're seeing this field evolve, and in particular, which parts of Islamic finance is seeing being more accelerated than the others.
Okay, maybe I'll start.
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Yeah? Okay. So, well, I guess you can put it in a sense, coincidentally, maybe, or maybe driven by the COVID, but since the COVID started, I have seen significant acceleration in terms of new startups and solutions in Islamic fintech globally. But just before that, I would say that the momentum picked up and tapered off slightly over the years. Because we started in 2014. When we started, I mean, we are considered a dinosaur, I guess, in this space. 2014, there was nothing basically for Islamic fintech. We didn't know we were one of the first few, and it was just a coincidence because we were trying to solve a gap in our home country. I mean, I was based in Singapore at that time. So then we formed in 2015 the Islamic Fintech Alliance, which is a group of pioneer founders. So fortunately, today, most of them, there were 11 of us, I think, about 9 of us are still running our companies, and a number of us are doing quite well. And through this global network, we more or less are connected to, I guess, the community for Islamic fintech. So what we've seen is that there has been the most significant growth over the past 9 months or 1 year, compared to before that, in terms of the rate of growth, and especially the I would say the quality or potential quality of the startups based on the strength of the founders. I mean, you can, for any kind of startup, you can be so-called a nobody with no background, and you can create something great. But sometimes in fintech, it helps a lot if you come from a strong finance background, right? So today we can see, individuals from investment banks, from significant institutions jumping in to become an entrepreneur. At the same time, you see, or we see, young people, people with little relevant experience also jumping in and getting support from industry, or angel investors from industry. So these are very, very good early signs. I would say the market, the space is still quite nascent, it's still quite small, but it is growing very fast, and the momentum is building up right now.
Thank you, Umar. I wouldn't call you a dinosaur, I'll call you a pioneer, right? And you lasted so long, that shows the resilience that Ethos has had.
Yeah, the joke is it's not a unicorn, it's a camel. The camel can last a long time.
A very strong camel at that. Mastura, coming to you, right? We're good to get from you a perspective on how you see Islamic banks transform themselves from a fintech perspective or digital perspective. Is the pace strong enough? Are they actually now realizing the changes that are taking place in the banking world outside of Islamic finance?
I think we all can agree that today and in the coming days, fintechs, the regulators, and even the non-banking players are going to be involved in an integrated system for the financial services to move on. So I think from my side, on Islamic fintech, I'm seeing a number of interests even that actually are going cross border, I would say, from regulatory to even private sectors, right? So I think I've seen some work that's being done at Kuwait Finance House, for example, looking at blockchain and how they can actually explore use cases that involve this decentralized environment. And even I think there's some work at Islamic Development Bank, and even in Malaysia we have a couple of I would say efforts to create a stable coin that is that's Sharia compliant and backed by gold. So and also there's things like Hello Gold, which offers a platform for people to buy gold in a Sharia compliant manner in that sense. So I think we are moving there, and like Umar said, it's still small. But I think we're getting there. I'm not sure. I don't think it's going to be a linear progression. Definitely at some time we're going to get to that inflection point where the interest is just going to come in, and all the institutional interest comes in, and we're just going to go like boom. It's very difficult though in this ecosystem to say, oh, it's going to happen in 3 years or 2 years, because what we're seeing is things are moving extremely fast nowadays in decentralized ecosystem. So I hope the same thing will also take off in Islamic finance in that sense. That's how I see it.
Thank you, and I agree. I think it's going to not necessarily be very linear. It's going to be a different pace, different ecosystems. One of the things I see about Islamic banking in general has been that they probably were a little more protected than traditional banking, because they had a target consumer base who would definitely come to them and they didn't have an alternative. But as more younger people who are digitally savvy and are looking to become more banked, right? Because a large number of the Islamic world is underbanked and largely unbanked as well. So with mobile phones and fintechs coming in, there will be that competition which will heat up in a very soon time. Dan, coming to you, in regards to blockchain, and our audience is also quite curious on that, would be very good to hear from you on a few use cases in particular with on a few different types of use cases, ranging from the traditional trade finance to some in trading, all the way to what we're looking from a central banking digital currencies. If you could touch, I know very broad topic, and I'm putting you out there to answer this question, but you're an expert. I'm more sure who can handle this well.
Sure. I'll give it a shot. I mean, each of these topics are really big, as you suggest, right? So let me start with trade finance. I think trade finance for the longest time is obviously an area where there's lots of opportunity for people to defraud each other, which is why when banks saw an opportunity to do away with that fraudulent activity by using a blockchain technology to basically track items and then execute certain payments along the supply chain, it was something that is very interesting. But I also believe that the potential in trade finance for blockchain is somewhat limited because these blockchain platforms are private, right? They are not public blockchain most of the time. And it's interesting, I've spoken to a number of entrepreneurs that are trying to do something in that space. And I like how Mastura earlier talked about the right mindset because they don't have it, right? When you talk to them individually, they will tell you, yes, I'm all in for blockchain, but gotta be my blockchain. Then everyone else can join, right? But if everyone has that attitude, we cannot create a community, right? It's not gonna work. So I think I'm not so positive when it comes to blockchain and trade finance. I do think that there's a lot more opportunity in what we call decentralized finance, effectively providing the key primitives of services that finance provides to mankind, right? Whether that is borrowing and lending, or whether that is trading of assets, or whether that is investing or asset management. All of these, even insurance actually now, all of these services can be provided through a smart contract now. And the number one advantage of a service on a blockchain versus a traditional institution is that the cost-income ratio is unbeatable, right? Because if you run a bank, for example, or you run an asset manager, you have a lot of IT system, a lot of people, you have a lot of capital and operational expenditure. But once the smart contract is created, all people have to pay is the transaction costs. So it completely changes the economics in that sense. So I'm very interested in this kind of field of decentralized finance. Let me wrap up with saying a few things about central bank digital currencies. I'll start with something positive. I do think that they can help with financial inclusion if governments can enable more, or ideally everyone, to have access to a digital device like this, which we should also not forget is not the case everywhere in the world, right? But then I think it's a great opportunity to include people who don't have access to financial services today. However, I'm also worried about two particular things. One is cash today has a privacy feature. We can go down to 7-Eleven and buy a Snickers bar and nobody will ever know about it. In fact, we can buy 100 Snickers bars and eat them all tonight and nobody will know about it, right? We will feel bad tomorrow morning when we wake up. So privacy is one. Will governments keep that privacy feature? Technically, they could, but I doubt that they will. So that's one concern. The second one is central bank digital currency is basically programmable money. And if you think about what programmable money actually means, well, one of the things it means is that it can expire, right? And how do you feel about the government being able to delete some of your account balance if and when they please? I'm quite worried about that as well, expiry. It's not something that is a utopia in China. There's already vouchers that are being given out before Singles Day or one of these e-commerce days. And that money has an expiry date on it. Right? You either spend it on Singles Day or it's gone. So I think those are my few thoughts about DeFi and CBDCs and trade finance in hopefully under 3 minutes.
That was very well collected as such. What I will do now is we're seeing a very enthusiastic audience. We have over 12 questions that we have in there. So let's take them, and then I'll try to weave that into the conversation as we go forward, right? So maybe let's start a little bit about, let's say, sorry about that. Oh. Mastura or Umar, if you want to take this, maybe Mastura will be more comfortable with this. From an Islamic finance perspective, what would you think will be the best use case of for which blockchain can be applied?
Sorry, Musheer, was there a
What's the
question?
best Islamic finance use case for blockchain?
Oh, Islamic finance use case. Okay, this is my humble opinion, of course. I think, like I said just now, there's a lot of marginalized communities, or I wouldn't say beyond that. There's a lot of communities on the peripheral that we never saw before. Some of these are called unbanked, but some of them are just because they don't want to be in the banking system. That's all. But we are seeing them to come in, especially the younger crowds, and they come in and they talk about their interests as a group through tokens and things like NFT or non-fungible tokens. These people share interest in arts, for example, or music or something like this. So I think this will be very, very big once people realize that it has a lot of implication, even DeFi and yield farming and all these things, that it has a lot of implication in terms of bringing people or financial inclusion. The people that did not have the platform to actually talk to themselves and bring value what they have, now will have something to talk about and to exchange with each other because they all share same interests. This used to be in the first phase just for gamers, right? But now we're seeing it slowly going into other areas of interest. So I think this is where the what we call this thing is the Islamic finance thing is going to be big. But in order to do that, we can't just take whatever that's there right now. We have to benchmark them and study them and see how we can actually manage or the risk and the halal content and the Sharia compliance elements and all these things, and somehow make it into some kind of MVP, minimum viable product using blockchain, maybe that can be agreed upon by global audience and put a premium on top of it. Something like this is where I see that one of the biggest what we call this contribution by this ecosystem to Islamic finance and how it can help us in the future. Right.
Thank you.
Does that help?
That's very helpful. Umar, maybe from your end as well, anything you want to add, especially when we're looking at, you did briefly mention about it for the crowdfunding for construction that was done. Ethos had done a partnership earlier, right? So that could be a good use case to talk about.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's one use case, but to give a wider answer, my humble view also is that I think the opportunity here is for Islamic finance to really reach the masses, to solve financial inclusion challenges and gaps. And why I say so is because in Islamic finance, especially Islamic banking, I think is quite notorious for having high costs. And to some extent also too many processes, or it's not nimble, it's not fast, it's heavy in cost, and so you're not able to give small financing, small loans. So I believe that with the potential that blockchain can bring to finance, that's where you can lower down the cost, you can automate a lot of things, and also you can create a lot of efficiency in terms of contracts and transactions, and that will and can allow financial inclusion. And the additional component to that is the decentralized funding approach, where the decision on who to give to and who to invest in will then start to move back towards the people. So that, I believe, will help to reach the objectives of the Sharia, of the Maqasid al-Sharia, inshallah.
Very true, right? And as you said, disbursement as well. Whenever the profits are there, you could use smart contracts for that. One use case that, in addition to what both of you have said, I would like to add is on halal investments, right? So through a blockchain, you can track a company's behavior, what they've been doing, as well as where their investment is going, if it is being done using the blockchain, which will then help you validate whether that company is functioning and everything else is in the halal economy. Right? So that'll be one other element. Dan, the next question probably is for you, and I'm going to combine a couple of questions here, but how can one use blockchain for implementation in centralized corporate finance instead of decentralized finance? Because in many countries, decentralized finance or even peer-to-peer models can be are illegal or not regulated. Any examples you'd like to share? And the second one is generally a conversation about how long does it take to build blockchains, and what, in your opinion, may be the top blockchain protocols.
I'm also looking at all of the questions, and I want to thank everyone who's dialed in today, because it's always good to have very proactive audience. Let me try and pick on a few things. So I do think that the idea of a private blockchain has limited use. So I'm not such a big fan of just using blockchain for argument's sake, or for being able to talk about that, now you have a blockchain solution. If it doesn't do anything for a community, I'm not such a big fan. But what I do also want to pick up on, that there's a question about, whether there are genuine use cases for DeFi. And that is something that I have also mentioned recently. Basically, in the DeFi ecosystem, unfortunately, right now, we don't have a net buyer of these financial services. We have one speculator and another speculator, and that is no good. So what I'm hoping that is going to happen soon is that we will have more individuals or entities that actually do need some financial service, and then some other people who say, yes, I'm after some sort of return, and then I'm willing to take that risk, and I'm going to finance this activity that somebody else needs, right? Because that's really the idea behind finance, is to help people get on with their things and create something useful, rather than speculating from one token to the next one. In terms of really good platforms, I don't really want to mention any particular names, but the one thing that I want to say is I can really see how ESG is going to play a very important role going forward. And unlike in traditional finance, where there's a big argument whether ESG is good for returns or not good for returns, on blockchain, to me, it's very clear that those platforms that are energy efficient, those platforms that can solve inequality problems and tackle the S in ESG, also those platforms who have very good decision-making structures and on-chain governance will definitely succeed, right? Take environmental impact only, for example. We now have so many different disclosures that all of these big corporates need to worry about, right? All the TCFD regulation, for example. These companies can't possibly use blockchains that work on proof of work, right? Because they're going to get screened across their supply chain. And if there's something that is not good for the environment, they're going to get their hand slapped. So I think thinking about these decentralized smart contract platforms more through an ESG lens is probably something that is quite important. Let me see what other questions there were. I think there was something around. Let me see. What was the first question, Musheer, that you mentioned about the?
It was about use of, blockchain in centralized corporate finance.
So yeah, in corporate finance, yeah. I don't know whether that is. So far, if you look at the DeFi literature and also the projects that have been set up so far, corporate finance doesn't really feature so hugely because I guess the entities that are interacting are not really companies, right? So corporate finance at its core is really one company doing something with another company, with a merging or divesting or whatever. So I think there's maybe not such a huge opportunity in corporate finance. However, I think that the concept of storing, ultimate beneficial ownership on the blockchain and being able to transfer ownership via a blockchain mechanism, that is very useful because it removes a lot of the cost that is associated with the transfer today. Right now, you have to go to some central entity and ask the government register to be updated and so on and so forth. So some countries like Liechtenstein and Singapore already have put the legal framework in place for that to happen. And I would hope that that happens in other countries around the world as well. I guess I'll stop there because we're running out of time.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to add, I think one from a traditional finance, not necessarily corporate finance, you are seeing on the trading side. So when you're trading stocks, when you're trading bonds, etc., settlements typically involve a multitude of parties, and there's a lot of reconciliation and double checking, etc., that takes place on settlements. With blockchain, you could then solve this massive issue that exists where everybody can then get the same copy of the settlement, so reconciliation goes away and increases huge amount of efficiency. This can also be applied from a regulatory perspective for regulatory reporting. You could then automatically, whenever you're doing any transactions, if you attach a note to the regulators, they'll have an oversight and can view it, and rather than you having to constantly send updates to the regulator. So I'll stop there. I'll answer the next three questions in one, which is on why do altcoins follow Bitcoin, and is Bitcoin an asset or a currency? So from an altcoins following Bitcoin, effectively Bitcoin is the oldest of them all and most valuable. So as in the case with most things which are a leader and the prime coin or prime asset, the other assets tend to follow as a trend. You do know, but alts are starting to move away from Bitcoin in some cases, and you are seeing divergence. This year was an example. Bitcoin from start of year to now is probably up only a few percent, while the likes of Ethereum and a few others are up 200-300%, if not more, right? So you're seeing that divergence starting to take place. On whether Bitcoin is an asset or a currency, it can be both. Depends on when you're doing a transaction and purely using the Bitcoin network for a transaction for payment, it's then a currency. If you're holding on to the Bitcoin as an asset for investment, then it's an asset. A bit like the dollar, right? You could use it for transactions, or you could invest in it because you feel that the value of the dollar against your currency is going to go up. So I'll end with that. Maybe this will be, if either of you, Mastura or Umar, want to take it, what would be the perspective from Islamic perspective on cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin? It's also an added question on whether they could be considered Sharia compliant in general.
Okay, I'll go first. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I won't touch on the Sharia compliance part, mainly because the experts have given their views. You can search for it. Some say it's okay, some say it's not. To summarize those, to generalize those who have the opinion that it's not allowed or it's not permissible, is mainly usually revolving around the fact that there is no central authority. So I guess that's something difficult to resolve because that's the nature of how it works. And on the other hand, those who say that it is allowed is because there is this overriding principle that you can make something haram if there's no reason for it to be haram in essence. Yeah, so I guess those are just some very quick summary of a deep, complex topic which I'm not an expert of. But my personal view on whether it is encouraged or you should look into investing, of course, it's a personal opinion and it's your own personal choice. But I personally will not put my money so much in crypto, or at this point, I don't put it at all. Mainly because I have the view that when you invest in something, you need to believe that it's going to create value, and that's the way I think. And the value that it creates needs to be real value in the real world. So as much as I'm a proponent of the technology, by the way the markets are going right now for the crypto markets, to me, it's pure speculation, and your money is not really creating any value in the real world. So that's my perspective. Yeah, and so from there, from the Islamic finance perspective, I feel that although potentially it's not haram, but there are better ways for you, better avenues for you to invest. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Mastura, any views on that to add?
Disclaimer, because I do have some cryptos. I keep some cryptocurrencies first to test it, but then also I like it because I think the idea is that that thing is not a physical money or asset as we know it. I mean, you can't feel it with your hand. So there's a lot of ideas and work that's involved in it, and they have value. So you have things like, these people working on privacy and all these things, and they're all embedded in certain kind of coins and all these things, right? And they allow decentralized web, for example. Those things you pay them not in fiat money, but you pay them in coins. So there's actually real value in those use cases. So how are you going to say that it doesn't exist? I'm not going against. This is my opinion as well. It's my personal opinion. But as a country, I think in Malaysia we don't recognize Bitcoin as a currency. Also as a formal currency. It's only recognized as a digital asset. And I think that in Malaysia as well, the exchanges have received Sharia compliance endorsement from SC. So, I think because there's certain kind you can actually manage risk by that. And I think in finance, you can't get away from risk. And this element is very important for you to consider when you want to see something is good or it's bad. That's all I can say. But at the end of it, I also cannot say whether it's, to me, if it's fiat, but if you use it for trafficking, for example, that's halal, that's haram, even though the fiat is halal. So if Bitcoin, if you used to help people in Venezuela, for example, they have no access to food, then is that bad? I think that's a fair use of a digital asset. So I think it really depends on the context of use on all these assets. That's my personal opinion.
I completely agree on that. And just to add a thought on top, right, or below that, in the sense that when you look at blockchain, it's a technology at the end of it, right? It's a bit like the internet. You have a lot of illegal activity or haram activity as well that takes place on the internet, while you have Peace TV, you have this conversation now we're having, and other things which are Sharia compliant. So it has to be objectively looked at from an application perspective and separate the technology of what it can do and the application of what it can do. I'll stop there. We are going to extend this conversation by 5 minutes because we've seen such a large response from all of you. Thank you so much. You very indeed touched on your questions, and the audience and our speakers have kindly agreed to continue for 5 more minutes. I will take the next question, which I think we didn't really speak so much upon, with regards to regulations, right? In particular around cryptocurrencies, the blockchain ecosystem, and decentralized world. It has become an important aspect. So Dan, coming to you, what would you feel or your expectations from regulators' approach? We've seen extreme approaches like in mainland China where blockchain is allowed, but almost everything is not allowed on the cryptocurrency side, while you have other places where all kinds of cryptocurrency transactions are allowed. I mean, all legal kind of transactions are allowed. So where do you see this progressing? Part A. Part B, because I come back to Mastura and Umar on this, would be on CBDCs. How much do you see central banks are embracing CBDCs globally?
Okay, I'll try and start. So I think my general stance is that there are a lot of countries in the world that are trying to wrap their head around what to do with all of these digital assets. And I think that's positive. Also, what we should not forget is, these regulators, their job is not to innovate, right? Their job is to protect the public and make sure that there's no unmanageable risk. Their job is to keep stability of the financial system. So when some people say, "Oh yeah, but why are they so slow?" I'm like, yeah, they're not supposed to innovate, right? Other people, entrepreneurs can innovate. Having said that, I think it's quite encouraging to see that there are so many regulators around the world that are trying to create opportunities for entrepreneurs to deal with that technology. We just saw, I think last week, that the MAS in Singapore opened a new sandbox so that startups can basically start to play with the Singapore CBDC. I think, was it yesterday or today? I forgot. The German regulator BaFin approved Coinbase as a digital asset custodian. So these are all sort of very encouraging developments. I think earlier today, Deutsche Börse, which is our stock exchange, bought a company, a Swiss company called Crypto Finance, 2/3 at least of it. So you can see that government agencies and companies that are, part of financial services infrastructure are moving into this digital assets area, which is very encouraging. But of course, there are also other developments, right? So in the UK, FCA told Binance to basically stop their business pretty much, if I understood that correctly. We then also have this issue with the travel rule, which is an ongoing conversation about tracking individuals' data across platforms. So these are all interesting developments, sometimes more positive, sometimes less positive, but overall, I think it's good that people start to think more about it and then eventually, hopefully implement something that is reasonable.
Thank you, Dan. I'm just going to quickly touch on the CBDC element. We are seeing a huge number of countries and central banks explore that. I think about 80% or 90% of central banks are exploring, as per the Bank for International Settlements, which is the central bank of central banks in some senses. So if you're looking at knowing what's happening on that space, BIS came out with a survey on CBDC, so you can have a look at that. Very quickly, Mastura and Umar, what are your views on Malaysia exploring a CBDC, if there is any news that the Central Bank of Malaysia have spoken about?
I don't have much perspective on this. Mastura?
Okay.
Okay, I think it will take some time. I think that's my opinion on CBDC for Malaysia. In Malaysia, our financial system is fully controlled. It's fully, by central bank for risk management reasons. So I think we really need to do a thorough study about it. And before it can, there is a study that's undertaken right now, but I think it would take a bit of time to be decided on what form or how it's going to be, or if we are going to go for it after all. That's my opinion.
Great. Thank you all. I think it's been a fantastic conversation. And our apologies to those who have asked questions we couldn't answer. There's only so much time we had. We're very encouraged by your Q&A. Please reach out to each of us. We are available on LinkedIn. You can connect to us. And also through the Baidu Musharra team, we'll be happy to take questions offline. I will ask, and I'll end this quickly from asking each of the panelists, if they had to pick two trends going forward in the next 3 to 5 years in the fintech and decentralized world, what would be the two main ones that you see happening? A very short explanation, a very short answer. Mastura, how about we start with you?
What I see that should come, I think, the Islamic finance area, as a community, we need to actually create some kind of a body that's based on open source of intelligence from everywhere, and actually to build a more resilient system based on what we've learned in the past 70-80 years of being in the formal financial institution arena. And from there, we should move forward and take advantage of the decentralized trend that's actually becoming the thing after COVID and what we call the new world right now. We have to do it. That's what I see from my side.
Thank you. Dan?
I guess we already spoke about the two things that I think are quite important, but I'll just say them again. So I think within decentralized finance space, decentralized exchanges, I think will be very, very important in the future. And then I also believe that all of these blockchain platforms that can run smart contract platforms will be gauged much more by ESG principles than ever before.
Thank you. Umar, from an Islamic fintech perspective, what could be two things that we can all expect in the coming 3 to 5 years that will change how we interact with finance?
Sure. I'll just share one thing if you don't mind. So, and it may not be the most significant, but I think it will make a big difference. It will be an explosion of creativity. I feel when we are able to accept tokenization of value in terms of things that society values, and not necessarily money, assets, and so on. So, for example, reflecting value in the form of tokens for education or for mentorship or for volunteer work. I think this kind of mechanisms can actually bring a lot of value to society by actually ascribing a certain token or a form of quantifying that value, and so creating the ecosystem and the interaction, guiding the behavior of the different parties. I know it's a bit abstract, but I feel that this is something that will make a lot of difference.
No, thank you. I think that the three distinct views, but three also important views. In my opinion, the way forward is going to be hi-fi, as we like to call it, which is hybrid finance, where you will see a mixture of traditional finance working with decentralized finance and new models emerging. At the end, the consumer should be the winner, and we will see more movement towards that. We are seeing regulators becoming more positive towards innovation, and actually, frankly, they must be regulating innovation at the fastest pace in history ever, right? So that's a great element. Now, we've come to the end of the panel, and I want to thank all of our speakers, Pak Mastura, Daniel, and Pak Umar, for joining us today. On behalf of both Baidu Musharra and Gift, we're delighted to have you here and loved your insights on the topic. And I want to thank the organizers for hosting us again. So thank you, everybody. We will now see a short message from Baidu Musharra about a few topics. So please watch before you leave, and thank you from us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.